Good afternoon. I'm very pleased to be with you here today, and I want to thank Elena and the Creative City Network for inviting me to come and share my experiences of transforming my community, the City of Toronto, through cultural planning. Before I start, I want to say, looking out at all of you in this room, how exciting it is to me to see the representation of what's happening across Canada. Each of you are doing dynamic, creative work, and I had the occasion last night and this morning to speak to a few of you. It is so inspiring, and kudos also to Creative City Network for helping to support and spread this work. Today I want to tell you about how cultural planning transformed not only the cultural landscape of Toronto, but how it transformed the city itself, and how the cultural planning done in Toronto in the mid to late 80s set the stage for work done in Canada and elsewhere. Around the globe, municipalities have found that cultural planning is central to city and community building, that it lays the ground for healthy neighborhoods and vibrant economies, that it can be the roadmap that connects diverse cultures and can transform our civic society. It was not always so. Back in the early 80s, when I started my career as an arts activist with the Toronto Arts Council, the arts in my city, and indeed I think in almost every city in Canada, perhaps with the exception of Montreal, were a nice to have if we can afford it. There was certainly no understanding of the connection between a city's creativity and its social and economic well-being. How did all that change? It changed largely because of a combination of cultural planning and cultural activism begun in the mid and late 80s. I once argued that a good culture plan had a lot in common with a work of art, and to really push that metaphor with an iceberg. The part most focus on and see is the relatively small tip, gloriously visible above the waterline, shining in the sunlight. But as we all know, the bulk and power is the work that goes on behind all that lies beneath the surface. It takes time to create a culture plan, often under very difficult circumstances. You know, when I created my first culture plan, and believe me, I don't think we even understood we were creating a culture plan, never mind that we were cultural planners. I never thought that cultural planning would become so au courant, so part of the zeitgeist, that there would be, well, conferences on cultural planning. What I'm trying to say is that the process is fundamental, that stumbling around in the dark is sometimes inevitable, and that dogged perseverance is required. But, again, as we all know, the work is exciting and even exhilarating. Looking back, when I first started working in the cultural bureaucracy, I think one of my key strengths was that I didn't know what I didn't know, so I assumed that a lot could be done, and a lot needed doing. Our budget was tiny. At the City of Toronto, it was $250,000 for grants for the entire city, and even back then, that was chump change for a city the size of Toronto. Coming from the theater, I knew how important it was to have a strong text as a starting point, a blueprint upon which to build the production. If it ain't on the page, it ain't on the stage. So we needed words, a manifesto, an analysis, a flag to rally the troops around, a plan. And then we got really lucky because a real writer, in fact, a playwright, a guy named Tom Hendry, came on board. This began a wonderful, fortuitous collaboration between us that eventually resulted in a report called Cultural Capital, the care and feeding of Toronto's artistic assets. And that process we embarked on, we were to discover, was utterly unique at the time. To map the economic and employment landscape of the City of Toronto. In our research over the next year and a half, we found out that there was not a single municipality anywhere we could discover who had ever mapped their cultural economy. Tom was a vital part of the cultural community, having not only been a playwright, but a theaterwright. He'd founded the Manitoba Theatre Centre and the Toronto Free Theatre. When we started on our extensive soundings with the cultural community, Tom had the great gift for getting at the kernel of an idea, and among many other things, I am grateful to him for having taught me that. Cultural Capital, when it came out in 1985, was a pioneering and seminal work. The first municipal look in Canada at what investment in a city's cultural life translated into in jobs and economic impact. In other words, not treating culture as a charity case, an expense, but as an investment that paid surprising dividends. 30 years ago, that was a radical concept. Now it's pretty much mainstream. The report advocated a dedicated tax for the arts, a hotel tax, to help fund and promote the arts. It took 20 years to get that into place, and it's still only for the promotion part. We also spoke for the need for one-stop shopping for the film industry, which was put into place and has proved hugely lucrative for the City of Toronto. There were many other recommendations, but one I want to focus on with you today is the recommendation to benchmark the city's cultural spending based on a per capita target. This allowed not only for comparisons to be made between municipalities, more importantly, it set a target for us to aim for and rally around. The target we set back then was $15 per capita. This strategy proved very effective, and in 6 years, the TAC's budget rose by 2,400%. Now, it had started at a very low base, but still. We also identified that a big problem facing the cultural community was affordable working space. In response, we set up Toronto Artscape. I know there was somebody from Artscape earlier, and there was a big discussion about this. So we set up Artscape, which has become a wonderful, effective, and creative organization. As well, we advocated for a loosening of the very tight municipal zoning regulations in order to allow for live workspace to be created. And the results of that can be seen in the warehouse districts across Toronto, where they are filled with artists and creative workers. Really, to anyone who had been paying attention to how city neighborhoods evolve over time, it was strikingly obvious how culture workers created economic value into any area they moved into and worked in. In fact, I still remember a sharp-edged graffiti statement from the 80s. Artists are the stormtroopers of gentrification. But the fact is, if artists did the heavy lifting when it came to turning around a neighborhood, they were rarely able to participate in the economic rewards they created, as they could rarely afford to own even a little bit of the rock that they had alchemically transformed into gold. They had all the creative capital and none of the economic capital. Cultural capital and my other cultural planning reports were an attempt to redress this. I think one of the key process decisions that led to many successful outcomes was breaking everything into small steps and achievable, doable actions. A broad vision, however exciting, has to be concretized into practical, doable steps that you aim for on a daily, weekly, monthly, yearly, and even decades-long basis. So you sometimes have to chop your plan into manageable chunks, and when necessary, portage these over inhospitable territory. I think we all know what I mean by that. And then reassemble it, when the time is right, into a seaworthy craft. Interestingly, a surprising setback we had early on was from artists who were uncomfortable both ideologically and practically with our economic arguments. And that debate, art for art's sake, is still legitimately with us today, though I think the practical argument that culture was not speaking to its innate strengths by exploring the economic case has proven to be wrong, as evidenced by this conference. The logical and organic development of our ideas was to ultimately start thinking of the whole city as a neighborhood that could undergo the alchemy of being transformed into a cultural hot zone where everyone would want to live and work. Adding economic value through having a creative, a better idea, rather than a stronger back. As a friend of mine once said, nobody pays to watch widgets being made. I believe that throughout all my cultural planning experiences, my instincts were really helpful, as well as a willingness to listen to the instinct that comes from working with artists. My point is that to achieve the sort of transformation I'm talking about, cultural planning must be, yes, systemic, rigorous, and full of useful data. That goes without saying. But just as importantly, if not more so, it must be creative, bold, and imaginative, showing a vision for not just what is, but what can be. When we came across the then largely unheard voice of Richard Florida, and believe it or not, there was a time when his voice was largely unheard, we knew that his research was hugely important. Or when I read about the city of Manchester, the phrase creative city jumped out at me as a metaphor for what our goal in Toronto could be. I must say in passing that the ability to mediate between the artistic world and the bureaucratic or even the political one is essential when creating a culture plan. You must be a skilled interpreter between these worlds as you pilot your ship forward. Having set out your vision, you must now deliver on it. And sometimes the fog is thick and the perils numerous. Dogged perseverance is a part of the job description. And you must keep your eye on the prize even as they keep moving the goalposts. Spending targets in cultural capital were an important component in our initial and enduring success in increasing cultural spending in Toronto. And I continued this strategy over the next 2 decades. In my next culture plan, the 2003 Culture Plan for the Creative City, we revised the target upwards to $25 per capita. And in my final culture plan for the City of Toronto, Creative Capital Gains, that target was reconfirmed. Now, it may not seem like such a big deal to get a target reconfirmed by City Council, but believe me, in the early days of the Rob Ford administration, that took a lot of blood, sweat, and tears, and major tactics. Thanks to that target, which was approved by City Council, very important, thanks to that City Council approved target and a campaign I'll tell you about in a moment, today the City of Toronto is within a hair's breadth of reaching that goal at about $23 of spending for culture per capita. And there's a plan that's been approved by Council to get to $25 per capita by 2017. A challenge to my former colleagues at the City of Toronto who are here today. With the new administration coming in October, and who doesn't believe that it will be a new administration, let's raise the bar and make that $30 per capita. by 2017. That sounds like a long way off, but as you know, with a bureaucratic two-step, one step forward, two steps back, cha-cha-cha, with an approved plan, you do eventually get there. By putting engagement with the arts community at the heart of the process, cultural capital woke up that community to its cultural and political strengths. That process of engagement also showed me that listening was an important part of my job. And that led to another culture plan called Cultural Equity. This 1992 report was used as a model throughout the country for funding agencies seeking to become more inclusive of diverse cultures and cultural practices. When I first heard at a meeting that TAC was not considered to be inclusive, my back went up. But then I started listening. And with the help of the amazing dub poet and strategist Lillian Allen, we started a 2-year journey of listening, listening, and then listening some more. The result was a report that called not only for the transformation of our programs, but of our board and committee makeup. I remember being in a meeting with a reggae artist and then Mayor Art Eggleton. "Mr. Mayor," he said, "I didn't know I was an artist until I met Ms. Davies. I thought that was just ballet dancers." After that, we got more funding. And with that, we set up a powerful program called Fresh Arts. Fresh Arts provided arts programs to youth from diverse and socially or economically challenged communities. A huge success. Fresh Arts served as a model for other youth programs across Toronto to this day and spawned a number of massive talents that have made a mark on our cultural world, especially in the R&B and rap music scene. Julie Black, Cardinal Official, Motion, the video director Lil X, and many others, once marginalized youth, are now leaders in our cultural mainstream. Through my career, I discovered that for advocacy to be truly effective, it's critical to bring artists and politicians together in an open conversation they both have a stake in. I'm pleased to tell you that the seeds of cultural advocacy planted by us in the 80s have blossomed. Not only that, but the torch has moved to a younger generation. As I mentioned, in 2003, we developed the Culture Plan for the Creative City. One of its recommendations was to establish creative funding tools for the arts, and one of those was a billboard tax. This was our second attempt at a dedicated tax for the arts. The hotel tax was only partially successful, and this time we put a big push on. And when I say we, I mean the whole community, led by a group of young, passionate artists who banded together under the name beautifulcity.ca. They reminded politicians of their long-standing promises to get Toronto to $25 per capita of funding for the arts. They launched an amazing campaign. They brought together a coalition from uptown and downtown. They ignited the imaginations of councillors from wards across the breadth of the city. They're organized, smart, make political friends across all ideologies and in the civil service. Thanks to their advocacy, in 2013, the City of Toronto approved a tax on billboards to go to the arts. Not even Rob Ford could stop it. The planning and policy were too embedded, the advocacy too strong. And that's how Toronto got to $58 million of cultural spending annually today. That's a long way from 1985, baby. So what have I learned over the years about cultural planning? First of all, listen to your instincts. Second, listen to your artists. Put them front and center. They should lead the way. Shoot for the moon. Vision is key. But at the same time, break everything down into manageable, doable steps. Set funding targets that work for your community. Persevere, and don't let the setbacks get you down. You know, we overestimate what we can accomplish in the short term and underestimate what we can accomplish in the long term. Put together a funding toolkit, whatever works in your community. Hotel tax, billboard tax, dollars from the planning process, percent for art, and let's not forget the good old municipal tax base. And work to get that toolkit made into municipal policy. And for all that, you need a plan that tells you who your community is, what its aspirations are, and how to get there. Do your homework. Be rigorous in your analysis. Make sure you have sound policies and strategies that are grounded in your municipality's governance framework and bylaws. Remember that billboard tax started as a policy. We got it approved by council and worked 10 years to put it into practice. Make political allies, lots of them. Always root your plan in your community and make sure it's as creative as the community that it's describing. Because creativity will forever be the spark that ignites our souls, unleashes our dreams, and is the catalyst that can bring community, culture, and politics together. Thank you. Would you like to do it?
No, you.
Oh, okay. Questions? No questions?
You have
It's all self-obvious.
It's a fantastic opportunity to ask Rita a couple of questions. Yes? Do you want to stand up and say where you're from?
Hi, my name is Clayton Windat. I'm from
Hi.
North Bay, Ontario. I'm speaking loudly because I don't have a microphone yet. Hi, that's better.
Did you say Berkeley, Ontario?
No, North Bay.
Oh, North Bay, yes.
Yes, and we recently had a meeting exploring the, let me see. I'm here with Christian Clark from Carfax, Ontario. Wave, yeah, there he is, pointing him out. I brought him up to North Bay to talk about the billboard tax and how to implement it in North Bay in the same way. Maybe you could talk a little bit about some of the background framework on what it took to get that going, because I know that you mentioned it, and I also am aware that it took like 10 years to get it in place almost.
Yeah. Well, one of the things is for municipalities, as I think you know, in Canada, are creatures of the province. It's a little different in Quebec, but anyway, for the rest of the country. And so in this case, there was something that called the Toronto Act, which allowed Toronto to put in place some taxes over and above the municipal property tax. One was a vehicle registration tax, which was put in place under the regime of Mayor David Miller. In his wisdom, Mayor Rob Ford eliminated that almost in the first moment of taking office. And another was a billboard tax. So one of the things that I think I can tell you is that for something like that, you may need to get provincial enabling legislation, which makes it more complicated, but clearly not impossible. And the idea was billboards kind of pollute our landscape. And so, and in Toronto anyway, I don't know what it's like in any other municipality, they were paying virtually nothing for this real estate, or not, they were paying an owner of a building to put a billboard up on their roof or on the side of their building. This was public space, which we all had to look at, and in a way, you know, was polluting our public space, and we, the community, the citizens, the city, got nothing back. So the thinking was, put a tax on it and use that money to help beautify the city. So there was actually, you know, a kind of a thought-out correlation between the tax and why it should go to the arts. In terms of the latter stages, you should get in touch with Devin Ostrom from beautifulcity.ca if you haven't already, because he can tell you about how they did their campaign. It really was quite amazing. Yes?
My name's Betty Ann Keller. I'm just recently retired from the city of Waterloo, and my question is about the complexity of the city of Toronto with the 905 and the 416. Did your planning embrace the whole picture?
Okay, just to clarify, and you would be surprised at how many people in Toronto, in fact, almost everybody I speak to who's not a municipal civil servant, thinks that 905 is part of Toronto. It's not. 416 is all of the amalgamated city of Toronto. It's Scarborough, it's Etobicoke, it's North York, it's East York, it's the old downtown. So I think your question really is, did our plan speak to the basically the suburban area of Toronto as well as the downtown? Yes. Cultural capital did not. That was the old city of Toronto. There was no amalgamation then. It only spoke to the, you know, to the area that encompassed at the time. But with the culture plan for the creative city and creative capital gains, it spoke to the whole city, and it looked at ways of animating communities outside of the downtown core through the arts. It looked at ways of delivering programs, of delivering dollars to those communities. And through the city and through the Toronto Arts Council and the Toronto Arts Foundation, there are some really great programs happening in what we would call the suburbs.
Could I ask a second question?
Certainly.
How instrumental was the effectiveness of the Toronto Arts Council in helping you move your agenda forward when you were working for the municipality?
Oh, very. As those of you who work directly for a municipality, you know that as civil servants we must be seen but not heard, and that we cannot be openly seen to be advocates in that sense. You know, we can talk our talk to politicians, explain to them why it's really good for the city to have certain programs, but we can't go beyond that. So the Toronto Arts Council as an arm's length agency, very important as an ally to deliver the troops, I would say, you know, to rally the troops, to bring hundreds of people to meetings, to have them send letters and phone calls and to meet with councillors to push the agenda, which was not something a civil servant could do. Yes. Oh.
So Anna Bradford from Hamilton. What I'd like to know, Rita, is how did you get council buy-in?
You know, in my speech, it's all, you know, I put it into real shorthand in a short period of time, but it really was that layering in of policies, of the advocacy, of layering in I mean, we went back to council in the Rob Ford regime to get $25 per capita reinstated as a target. In a sense, we didn't have to, because council policy is council policy, and there was nothing to the contrary. But you know, we did it to add another layer within his, within that new administration. So just layering it in, lots of conversations with the politicians, and again, you know, as you can, and with your colleagues who are not inside the municipality, making sure they're hearing the message as well from lots of other people. And so one of my tactics, for example, Rob Ford's been elected mayor. You know, he has gone on record as saying he wants to, I mean, cut the arts. He wants to get rid of it. It's gravy. And so in thinking, and well, how to approach this, I went to the man who was appointed, chair of the Economic Development Committee, a city councillor from Scarborough, who was kind of part of the Rob Ford team, or he wouldn't have been made chair. And I'm not saying I had to twist his arm. He was very receptive. And I explained to him that, we'd done culture plan for the creative city. It was 10 years ago. With this new administration, we should have a new report. And I thought that this time we needed to have an outside advisory committee. And I thought I had the perfect business person to lead that. So that was my strategy, was to get the voice of business. And you notice the title, Creative Capital Gain. So it's, it's playing on the idea of this being, again, an investment portfolio. And so we got an individual who I knew and who had been very supportive in various arts areas, but who was a tried and true businessman with an investment company. In fact, a tried and true Tory, even though he had worked on another person's campaign, not the mayor's. I got him, Robert Foster, excited, and away we went with this report, which, was a good report. I can't say that the main aim of it was to break new ground particularly, though we did look a little more closely at what needed to be done in the suburban areas. And we did that one in 6 months. Usually I like to take time. Oh, and the other thing is, every single culture plan I did as at the Toronto Arts Council at the city, we did it ourselves. I'm not saying that everybody has to do it that way, but it was, with the staff, we would sometimes get special research done and that kind of thing. And so it became, something that the people who really knew the landscape and knew the players and knew the material and were knowledgeable about economic, the culture of the economics of culture. I mean, people like Elena Bird, since we had them on staff. So it's not possible for everybody to do that, because if it's a smaller municipality, you may not have that full range of talent available to you. But I found that a very, very strong way of doing it, because you're really coming out with something that speaks, uniquely about your community. But I think I've gone off topic.
Thank you for your presentation, Rita. That was fantastic. I took part in Greg Baker's really amazing presentation about the city of Detroit, and one of the things that he noted was that at the University of Pennsylvania, there's a really great, I guess, 10-year study that's been happening, 20-year study that's been happening about the social benefit of culture. And I think we all know that in this room. You have made the case a lot, I think, in your work about the economic impact, and that's important. But do you think that the pendulum is sort of swinging back to a case for the social impact that people in this room might be making to councillors and other bureaucrats?
I perhaps spoke about the economics to the expense of the social impact, but it's always been equally important to show the social impact. The vibrant neighborhoods, how culture can turn around a community, how it can make the connections between diverse cultures. If you're in a community where you have a lot of new immigrants, and we got 100,000 new people coming from places, not from other places in Canada, from other places in the world, 100,000 a year in Toronto. So that's a very important message about what the role of culture is in doing all of those sorts of things, and working with youth. And, well, the Fresh Arts program was all about that. So it's never been unimportant. And politicians like to hear that, and some of them are, that's their agenda. But I'll tell you the truth. I don't think we would have been nearly as successful if we had not been able to make the economic argument. In fact, we were, because it was the truth, and we were able to show it, because when push comes to shove, at least on a municipal level, my experience, this is just my experience, was that the fact that this was actual economic return made politicians more comfortable with the spend. They felt they could, I guess, tell taxpayers that this was all coming back to them in some way. So that was my experience. I think the social message is also very important, period, but it's very important in making the case, because, of course, politicians, especially on a municipal level, are all about community. But I did a culture plan for the town of Orangeville this past year, and we really pushed the economic argument, and that was what the town councillors, you know, were wild-eyed to hear, and I hope it helps them to get what they need. So it's not more important. It just seems to be the hook that has not stopped working. Thank you very much. I'm really, really, oh, there's another question? Sorry.
Thank you. I'm Laurie Seligman from City of Spruce Grove in Alberta.
Yes.
I don't want to bring this down, but I love coming to this conference because we all believe the same things. We come here and we hear the value of culture, and it's great, and we go, you know, marching down the street, and then we go home, and not everyone agrees with us.
Yeah.
You know, it's a funny thing, but they don't. We're still fighting the fight that, and we talked about it today, how important the arts are in schools, and yet we've seen band programs closed and drama programs and teachers and all that. So, how do you keep going? I know you talked about the two-step, one step forward, two steps back. And we'll all do it. We all do it in our own ways. But how do you keep going in the face of the arts is a frill, culture's a frill, we'll get around to it when we can. Yes, it's important, but potholes are more important.
Well,
they get the money.
Yeah. I think we all need to get a little reward now and then and see that the hard work and the dogged perseverance is actually making an effect. And I would suggest, again, if you've got your plan and you've got it all stepped out, I bet you can go back and see how much you've actually accomplished. So that's one thing. Say, yeah, we did make a difference. Maybe it wasn't like in the first week after, but you got to keep going back and back and back. And maybe not everybody's prepared to do that for 30 years. But, and it, you know, some of it took 30 years, but I would say ultimately, you know, even with the billboard tax money, it really was a 30-year process. So just know that. And the other thing is, you know, I said make political friends. And not all of them are going to be the politicians, but you can make friends with people whom the politicians want to please. So, I mean, you know all that. I don't need to tell you. You all know how to do that in your communities. You know, you've got your patron of the arts who's, who's a true believer and who can march into a mayor's office and nicely say how important it is that they need that kind of support. And the other thing is, you know, I said that setting our spending targets, you know, a lot of it was about getting something to aim for, and it was very effective in that way, but it was also effective in terms of the competitiveness that municipalities feel. You know, like, you know, we're behind Montreal, we're behind Vancouver, we're behind, I don't know, Moose Jaw, we're behind Lethbridge, and that's not a bad angle to play either, unless you're way ahead, in which case, don't show anybody the numbers. So I'd say, you know, look back at what you have accomplished and give yourself a pat on the back. Sometimes you're in the trenches. It really feels like you're not getting anywhere. And I'll bet you that you have. And that'll springboard you to the next success. Thank you. Thank you.